13 years ago, I moved to Germany. I had just turned 24. This is an unedited video about what triggered my move, what I expected, and what actually happened once I landed in Germany. I had just turned 24, and in September 2012, I arrived at Frankfurt Airport from Lahore, the city where I was born. I had never been to Europe before. I spoke German only at the A1 up to the A2 level. And after arriving at Frankfurt Airport with just one suitcase, I traveled 300 kilometers to the city of Freiburg, a city in the very south of Germany, close to the border with Switzerland and France. I had gotten accepted as a student at the University of Freiburg. And the year before, I had spent researching Germany, reading whatever I could about it. And back then, very few women from my country were coming to Germany to study, especially alone. Most of the women and most of my friends had gone to the UK, to the US, even to Australia to study. Hardly anyone I knew had come to Germany back in those days. I was the only Pakistani woman and the only Pakistani in that year in my program. When I started researching Germany, there wasn't so much information back then. I also didn't speak much German, so most of the resources I could find were in English. And actually, I work in marketing in Germany. In the last 13 years, I have built a career here. And among me and my other friends with an expat or immigrant background, we often talk about how German companies are not as good in marketing. But I have to be fair, back when I was researching coming as a student to Germany, there was really, really good marketing around it. And most of the information available to students made it look like everything is super simple. Once you show up, you go through these steps and you get your registrations into the city, into the apartment, all done, and you're ready to go. And everything is super fast and super streamlined. Yeah. Over the years, as more and more people arrived in Germany, and as I myself moved from being a student to a working professional, none of this was true. And there are loads of videos on YouTube now and websites and discussions and communities and forums about how slow the processes are in Germany, how hard it is to get appointments, and how things are not clear at all. Yes, theoretically there is a process, and yes, theoretically your work could get done in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, but that is seldom the case. The expectation I had was to find things to be a bit more streamlined, and the reality, even back then as a student, was that the rules and regulations were not clear up front, and there was very little flexibility within the processes themselves. So if you were coming as a student from within Germany or maybe even the EU, things were different for you. And if you were coming from outside the EU, it was a completely different nightmare. And very few resources were talking about this back then. So over the years, I got used to dealing with these processes. I got used to, being told that whatever needs to get done is not going to get done within the specified timeline, that it's just going to take longer and it's going to be 3 times harder than what it's advertised to be. And these expectations kind of became a part of my life, and I even got used to them. In the last years, I have dealt a lot with bureaucracy at every single level, at the level of healthcare insurance, liability insurance, rental contracts, owning property, and everything comes with layers and layers of paperwork, appointments with specialists and experts. And I built this kind of resilience to it where, I want to do something and I know it's going to take me 4 to 6 months. I have to go in prepared to face this delay. And I have to say that this is the most annoying and difficult thing about Germany, about being in Germany and living in Germany. And this is something that even if you're prepared for it, it's going to be very, very difficult to adjust to, especially if you come from a country where processes may not as streamlined as in Germany, but people are always willing to talk to you, and you can always talk to people to kind of negotiate around a process and try to find a solution that can be tailored to your particular problem. If you're used to that, then getting things done in Germany can and is a real pain. So back to my university days, I was studying in a very, very international program. Everything was in English in our program. And in the early year, we had a really, really good program coordinator. And somehow the problems with this master program started around a year into the program when the university decided to change it. This change was not communicated to anyone during the time of application or even during the time of admission. It only popped up in the middle of the program, and suddenly, things were different. The program seemed different than the one I had applied to. I know that for many people it worked out, and for others it was more challenging. And apart from that, many of the people or students I studied with back then got their degrees and left Germany. Now, I don't know if that was their plan. I don't know if that's what they planned to do from the beginning or if it just didn't work out for many students. And this was back in 2014. I ended up staying. So, first of all, the expectation of my master program, the first one that I did at Freiburg, was completely different from the reality of the program. I realized very early in the program that the university I studied at back home in Lahore was better, of a better standard, in providing a better education than I was getting at the master level in Freiburg. And the thing is that I went to a private university. So, yes, I am aware that you're not paying much for public universities and so on, and there are all particular challenges and things like that. I understand my privilege having studied at a private university back in my city. However, if I just purely compare, in retrospect, the two experiences that I had in my undergrad and in my graduation program here in Germany, I have to say that the program in Germany was not at all what I expected. It was very theoretical. Often the professors were coming and they weren't even using electronic media. The classes were hardly interactive. There was like a huge auditorium, and a professor would come in and he would have like 200 slides and he would just go through them, like in a monologue for 2 hours, and you would just sit there and kind of listen to that. I mean, you could just be at home and read the book, it would be the same thing. At one point, when they started recording these lectures or started sharing slides with you, a lot of students didn't end up coming to class at all. So, the aspect of being in a class together with multiple students or international students and hearing perspectives from other students, that kind of never happened in the majority of my classes. And that was a real disappointment because there was no opportunity to talk about things. Now, I don't know if in the last 5 to 10 years things have changed, because I'm talking about back in 2014. And we did have some kind of classes. As far as I remember, they used to call them seminars, so they were not regular classes. And in those classes, you could have discussions, and the classes were more interactive. But I started noticing back then that how I studied in my undergrad was way more interactive. The professors were more open to hearing questions and leading discussions and even encouraged that in the class. However, in Germany, it was a completely different situation. Like, you just came to class, you took maybe notes, you looked at the slides, or you didn't come to class at all and you just passed the exam. So there was very little interactive student life in those years. And by the way, I did another master program later at the Freie Universität Berlin. And that was a paid program, but that was much, much better. The classes were smaller and you could, and the professors even encouraged like doing actual discussions in the classes. But in general, what I noticed across my like sort of education in Germany, so two different parts of Germany, two different universities, both of them ranked as two of the best universities in Germany, especially the one in Berlin. I noticed that often the professors had an idea and they wanted you to just follow that or repeat that. They did not like that you had a different perspective. They did not want to hear the different perspective. Sometimes the professors came and said, well, write an essay on this and this theme in this country. And then you had like 30 people writing an essay about the same issue using the same theoretical frameworks. At one point, our professors were telling us not to use certain frameworks to dissect the situation or the economic or political condition in our essays. They just didn't want other perspectives. So, for example, if you were studying neoliberal economics or economics with a neoliberal focus, you could only talk about that and only write about that, and nothing else was allowed. And later on, when I was studying politics, it was very similar. In many of my classes, the professors openly said, hey, do not talk about the social constructivist lens at all. Only do realist, only do liberal, and so on. So it started getting annoying very fast, because a big part of being a student is listening to, reading about, and even discussing the different frameworks and different lenses to look at the same issue. But from my experience, the universities kind of clustered everyone into just one point of view, and they were very insistent about that. And if you deviated from that, you would get a bad grade, which nobody wanted. So most people ended up, getting through the program, doing the program just to get their final grade, just to get their degree. Which brings me to the next part of, studying and working in Germany, which is an insane amount of fixation on what degrees and certificates you have. Like, I know that to a certain extent, when you graduate, when you're fresh out of university and college, and when you're applying for your initial, like, first jobs, it's important for many companies to see, okay, what programs you did, what you studied, what's your skills and expertise, because they're based around what you've studied. However, in Germany, this never stops. So you could be working for 10 years in a career and have actual work experience in different German or international companies, but they still want to fixate on what you studied and whether you bring the certificate with you or not. And this applies to every single thing. It's not just your master education or your bachelor, but every single skill, they want it verified, or the system wants it verified, or your company wants it verified next to like a certificate. And it's actually interesting, because if you worked in project management, which I did, along with the other specializations in my career, but in project management specifically, if you want to aim for one of the big certifications like PMP or Agile, you have to be working for in the field for a few years before you're even qualified to get the certification. So how can you bring these certifications at the beginning of your career? And the work experience itself, it has a different value to theoretical knowledge and theoretical learning. Sometimes the two cannot be compared at all. You could be studying a topic or project management for years, but you've never worked on a project with like hundreds of people. So how would you be qualified for the job? In the German system, especially when you're applying for jobs, they want to verify your experience with your certifications. And that leads me to another kind of like insight. A lot of these certifications, they cost a lot of money. So you've already maybe come to Germany from a different country. You had your savings, you've enrolled in a program, you have your expenses, you're studying. It already costs a lot of money. And on top of that, throughout your career, especially in the beginning, you're supposed to keep racking up these certificates. And each one of these programs, they cost thousands of dollars. It's not easily affordable. So you're kind of locked out of a lot of professions because you can't afford to get the certificates that German employers want. And from my perspective, and also from my expectation, I was hoping that Germany would not be this kind of country. And people often say, well, you should have researched it. I did research it. I was 22 years old when I started researching Germany. I mean, I was very young, and a lot of people are very young when they came here. And you can only do so much research. You can't know all these dynamics of a country before you actually go there. And a lot of people are not coming from Europe or Western countries, so they only really have one opportunity to just come to this country from, Asia. They can't like do little trips or summer holidays there to find out about the culture. So it's, to me, it's then a question of privilege. And it's easy to say that you should have looked into this, but a lot of these things, there's no way of really knowing them unless there are resources in your language and accessible to you. I experienced this and I saw how this is impacting people who are not from this system. All right, so like I said, this was and is an unscripted video. So there was a gap between what I expected, what my research showed me, and what I experienced. And in the last, I don't really know, it's hard to put a number on it, but in the last years, all of these issues, instead of getting better, for example, the issues with appointments, waiting times, delays, crowdedness, they've gotten worse. I can't speak about how the universities have progressed or developed. There are definitely great universities in Germany with great programs, but just because a university is ranked high in the education rankings doesn't mean that all its programs are going to be good. So if you're picking programs to come and study in Germany, make sure you research that program very well and try and find alumni of the program to talk to them to really align your expectations with these programs. Just because a university is ranked number 1 or number 2 in the country doesn't mean that all its programs are going to have the same quality. Some programs, because of the specific politics of their department and the innovation they're doing, are just better funded, better maintained than other programs. So it's very important that you come for a program that is like the good ones and not get stuck in a program that's kind of neglected by the university. That's also going to happen often. Often the question comes up when people make videos or comments about Germany and they share their negative experiences. There's a lot of pushback, and believe me, this pushback was much worse 10 years ago. Now, the quantity of the content that's coming out from people having these negative experiences studying and working in Germany is just so much that the pushback can't happen on every single piece of content. So from my perspective, it's okay to talk about what doesn't work, because when we talk about what doesn't work, we can talk about improving that thing. We can talk about improvements and changes. That is not really what they do here in this country. People try to sweep the things that are not working, the broken things, the broken system, under the rug and not talk about them. That's considered bad. So you kind of, ignore them and just keep going and just keep going until a system completely breaks down. Anyway, now that I'm making this video and sharing my thoughts, really, you may want to know, and people may question, why I don't go back. I often get this criticism even on other pieces of content that I make. By the way, I'm a German citizen. Anyway, why did I stay? Why did I not leave earlier? When you're in the thick of things, when you're, studying and working, when you graduate, looking for jobs, when you've already made a big move of changing your country and coming to another country, it's not just so easy to pack up and go back. There are so many things that you think about constantly. A lot of people I've talked to over the years believe that going back is like them failing. So they associate it strongly with failure. And if you're from a very competitive, goal-oriented Asian culture, then the idea of leaving really destroys you mentally. You think that you failed. So people struggle with this a lot. In my case, for sure, there was this idea that if I go back, it means I failed. But also I had built a life for myself here in Germany. I had also built a career, though it wasn't easy. And I had an interesting job. I loved the projects I was working on. I loved in those early years the international projects with like a global exposure. I really felt that they had value, so I didn't want to leave when I was, working with other European countries across the EU on really cool projects. But after a few years working in Germany and across Europe with like 10 plus countries from the continent, and even African and Mediterranean countries, I career-wise kind of got, fixed in this market. So any future job I applied for was in the regions that I had worked with. If I am moving from Europe with a very European-centric career background to any other country in the world, I don't have the local expertise. So it only works for me if those companies there want this specific skill set, if they want to come to these markets, if they want something that I can specifically offer them because of my experience here. And often the companies are focused on growth in those regions. They want local people. Even in the local industry, they want local talent because those people know how the markets are working. And I now work and have worked in marketing for a very long time, in marketing and consulting. So my skills are really concentrated on the markets in Europe. And that's another reason why it's not so easy for me to find opportunities back in Asia or other parts of the world. And I'm very, very open to moving. In fact, and I talk about this in the later videos, I am actually leaving Germany, but I want to make another video on that topic. Apart from that, why I stayed, it was a certain level of stubbornness and persistence that when I had invested so much time in building my life here, I wanted and tried everything to make it work. And in many cases, I did make it work. I was successful. It came at a huge personal cost in the sense of having multiple burnouts, of the daily struggles with the system that wear you down. But, I just wasn't going to stop. So yes, I hit walls, barriers, and ceilings and try to figure out ways around them or through them. And for a great part of my life, I did manage to do that. And so I ended up staying here and getting my citizenship and building a career and buying a place. So yeah, it worked out. And like I said in the beginning, that I'm going to share these unscripted thoughts. None of this has been easy. And I feel like the German system and the country has fought me every step of the way. After some time, that really, I would say, is the one thing about Germany that I dislike the most, where the country doesn't help you to become successful, to create opportunities for others, to bring discussion, improvement, changes. They don't want that. The system doesn't want that. There are many great entrepreneurial, talented people in Germany, and they've built great things, and many people are still building these things, but it's just not a country where this is encouraged. This is a country where this is designed to be difficult. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead with this series. I've planned to reflect back on these 13 years in Germany, what they taught me, what I've learned. I'm gonna go into all these, different areas of education, which I did in this video. And coming would be topics like working and, I made a list, so I'm gonna read from that. Being a South Asian woman in Germany, often working in rooms where you're the only person of color. Career ceilings for people with immigrant backgrounds, and just in general about being a woman in my 30s and what has changed for me in the last years. So if you're new to my channel, stick around for more of these videos. And if you've already been here, then stick around too. I'll catch you in the next video.